We're live. All right. Welcome back to another podcast, everybody. In case this is your first time tuning in to the podcast, this is where we dive into wildlife science, and we try to use the information that researchers have gotten from their studies to make us better hunters, fishermen, and stewards of nature. So, in this episode, we're going to be talking about deer and panthers, and more specifically, the effect that panther presence has on deer and also other animals. But we're really focused on deer here because deer season is about to kick off in Florida next weekend. So we're just a week and a half away from opening day in South Florida. So my mind is fully on deer. Cody's is starting to get there too. George, I don't know about you, but a lot of people are starting to think about deer. So today we got a special guest. I already said his name, George Zaragoza, and he you kind of showed up out of nowhere with BHA, and we've become pretty good buddies through the Florida chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and he recently joined as the communications coordinator. But I'm gonna let you talk in a second, George. I promise. But George is a researcher. He's working on his PhD right now, and his PhD is focused on panther and deer genetics here in Florida, and probably some other stuff that was probably super generalized. And I'm gonna let you correct me in a second. Um, yeah, we're gonna hear all about his research. But first, a couple quick announcements. Um, this is the second to last time you're going to hear me go on and on about this, but as you guys should probably know by now if you've been listening to the podcast, Florida might be getting a bear hunt, and the final decision on whether or not that's going to happen is coming up at the next FWC commission meeting, which is happening August 13th and 14th. The day that they're going to make that decision is going to be the 13th. It's going to be the first agenda item. The commission meeting will be held in Havana, Florida, which is up near Tallahassee. So if you live in South Georgia or North Florida or anywhere else for that matter, and you're able to come, please consider coming out and supporting this bear hunt, showing that you support science-based management. We really need people to show up big for this because the anti-hunters will be there in force. So hopefully we'll see some of you guys there. I'll definitely be there. George, I don't know if you're going to be there.
Yeah, planning to be there.
He's going to be there. So, and then Matt, you had an announcement as well.
Yeah, so the Colorado chapter of BHA, so Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, is having their annual rendezvous next month. It's August 8th to 10th. We'll drop a link down below for more details, but it'll be around the Soap Creek campground in Gunnison. I'm bummed I won't be able to make it, but hopefully a lot of folks listening will be able to join.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool people in that chapter for sure. So, all right, George, let's talk about you. So, let's kind of help the audience get to know you a bit. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you from, how you got into hunting and conservation, and sort of what brought you into this community?
Yeah, I guess I can give a little bit more of a long overview. So I'm originally from California. I was born and raised in the Central Valley, which is really agricultural heavy region of California. So when people think of California, they think of the Bay Area or Los Angeles, so San Francisco or Los Angeles, and these big cities and beaches and mountains and snows and skiing part of the day, and then going to surf part of the day. But I grew up with basically completely flat farmland, and was surrounded by national parks basically on both sides of the valley. So when I was younger, I was visiting national parks quite a bit when camping with my family, and went on hikes and traveled to Yosemite, Sequoia National Park, Kings Canyon National Park, etc. So just living there and being able to experience all of that was really good to just get a background of knowing the importance of these protected lands. And eventually I decided to go to do my undergraduate at UC Davis. And so focused there on biology, was interning at a few labs, doing some ecological research. And then eventually got a job after graduating at Bayer. So Bayer has like a pharmaceutical division and a agricultural division. And so I joined on their agricultural division side, basically helping them develop non-traditional microbial-based applications for like pest control and plant growth. And so doing a lot of different types of testing to test like early stage potential products like that were initially in the pipeline. And then eventually I decided that I wanted to go back to graduate school to really focus on the conservation part of things, but take some of the skills that I learned at Bayer, which were very heavily involved in kind of like developing experiments and also learning how to do bioinformatic analysis, pretty basic stuff at that point, in addition to like some genomic stuff. And so ended up going to grad school in Florida, basically started in 2020. Right after COVID, and so that first really couple of years was all remote. And luckily, I was taking classes, so it was a good focus on like not worrying about too much of the logistics of research at the time. But basically, got a lot of like my prereqs done at that point, and then eventually switched over to doing more research-focused things. And so research-wise, I'm now focusing on primarily Florida panthers and white-tailed deer. So a lot of the questions I'm interested in are more about how land use and climate change have affected species distributions, in addition to species genetic variation. So I'm really curious to basically predicting how in the future that might change as climates are expected to change and as land use is expected to change, and there's expected to be more urbanization in certain areas around the US. But primarily focusing on these deer and panthers in Florida. A couple of other things I work on. Oh yeah, Mark, you have a question?
Yeah. Can you kind of like touch on sort of the implications of your research for, say, the average hunter? Like, why would somebody care about these different topics that you just mentioned?
The genetic side is the first thing that comes to mind, and I think it's one of the coolest ways to really understand species. Because my background was more ecological until I got into genomics. But basically, on top of just raw species numbers and on top of just understanding how your population interacts with their habitat, the genetic diversity of population can really predict how well that species is going to be maintained in the long term. So you can be talking about like a population within an area, or maybe like deer that are living on a parcel of land that you own. And if there's poor genetic diversity in that area, or very like high amounts of inbreeding, then it's very likely that something like a disease or maybe some environmental condition that the deer aren't able to adapt to might come through and have a very large effect across the entire population if they're not able to adapt either behaviorally or respond or adapt genetically to that. So really understanding the genetic aspect of things helps you develop a management framework where you help prevent things like high levels of inbreeding by potentially introducing genetic variation if you need to, or learning what's causing these restrictions to genetic variation. Like sometimes there might be limited connectivity between habitat corridors or like between different habitats. And so you might have to develop a like corridor or connective point to increase gene flow between two populations and help the genetic diversity of your population.
Right. So, and without naming any pieces of public land, because we try to avoid doing that, but what did you find? Is there some areas where we should be concerned about genetic diversity in deer populations or panther populations in Florida? Like, what have you found?
Right now, it's still early on, so like my first couple of chapters are focusing on like pumas more broadly in the U.S., and then another chapter on key deer. So I've been focusing on that basically and trying to get some of that research done. But as far as like the panther and the white-tailed deer in Florida stuff, the deer so far with the preliminary data looks like it's doing kind of as expected for being a species that's kind of stuck in this corner of the US in Florida on this peninsula that's a little bit more separated from other populations. So there's at least, again, this is really like tentative, some like evidence that there is genetic diversity like along a gradient. So basically the more north you are, the more genetic diversity in your deer population, the further south you go, the less genetic diversity, which isn't unexpected. So that's pretty cool because it's a lot of our patterns that we're seeing are really similar to kind of what people expect just from a background or understanding how deer have ecologically made their home in Florida. Um, as far as the panther stuff, the panther stuff, especially in comparison to some of the key deer stuff that I've done, I think it's really like not surprising, but I think a lot of people don't realize how uh, inbred and kind of like the Florida panthers are compared to things like key deer. And you imagine key deer on this island that's isolated. They're not connected to the mainland at all. They're interbreeding with each other in high frequency. Yet the Florida panther is still not at a level in terms of genetic variation that's comparable to the key deer. And so Florida panther, I think people forget, is still in this kind of recovery stage after this genetic rescue program, that there's a lot of monitoring going on to assess the stability of the population looking forward several decades. But I think some people see the numbers of Florida panthers that are increasing, or the increasing number of vehicle collisions, but don't necessarily account for that genetic variation in the population that's potentially limiting the suitability, not the suitability, but the population, like, what word am I looking for? Like survivability into the future.
Stability,
So,
kind of.
What
so
was
you,
that?
I was going to say, like, kind of like their stability, like making sure that they have the genetic variability to avoid like mutations that could lead to, abnormalities, whether it's like a kink tail. I think that's like a common one, or like something that
Yeah.
might influence their survival, right?
Yeah, so that's one aspect of it. Yeah, making sure that they like are able to adapt or have the variation to help mitigate some of those inbreeding effects.
Yeah.
And another aspect is with the panthers, at least, understanding that some of that genetic diversity, especially if it's brought in through something like a genetic rescue program, can be lost over time, just as a natural process of how genetic variation kind of fluctuates through generations. Like you might have some rare variants that were brought in that are useful for the population to maintain its fitness, but if there's not high amounts of that like variant in the population, it's lost very easily. So it's important to kind of monitor those things as multiple generations of panthers are born.
so you brought us to this topic, and I think that we would be missing the elephant in the room if we didn't talk about these genetic rescue, this bringing in of Texas cougars and stuff, because this is obviously a very controversial topic here in Florida. There's a lot of hunters that bring this up all the time, that we've created these like super panthers. They're bigger and stronger, and they eat more deer, and like they're going to decimate the deer population. Um, and I've tried to explain to people that, the size of the Florida panther, the OG Florida panther, is caused by, low nutrient availability in the landscape. Like, I mean, that's why our deer are small. That's why all of our animals are smaller than they are up north. And that eventually, over time, we're going to see the panther population, even if they are bigger right now, which I don't know if there's actually any data that supports that, even though that's what people are saying, that eventually it will bring them back down to this smaller size. So it's sort of, maybe there's a temporary effect of them being bigger and stronger and badder or whatever. But with that said, I'm curious, are we seeing that this genetic rescue has been effective? Like, is this having a positive impact on the genetic variation of the population? Like, are we close to being, at a level of genetic variability where we feel like their population is more sustainable, or are we still like far from getting to that point?
I think that's one of the cool things, and it's because this genetic rescue program was implemented in 1995. It's one of the earlier implementations of something like this, and so as we're monitoring this over time, we're kind of assessing like how well that management type of approach can work to maintain or rescue populations. And so what's cool is that there was a paper that came out, I think it was last year or the year before, that they assessed like fitness abnormalities or physical abnormalities that were affecting fitness on top of genetic variation in Florida panthers compared to like mainland U.S. panthers. And basically, like over the first few generations, saw that there was a reduction in kind of these physical characteristics that are associated with either low fitness or low fertility that have been helping the panthers due to that genetic rescue program. In terms of like the genetic variation present in the panther population, what we're seeing in the hybridized panthers now is that the panthers look more than what we would have maybe expected in the past when there was connectivity between Florida and mainland groups of panthers. And so when you actually look at the genetic variation of the Florida panther versus like something like the Texas panthers, the hybridized panthers skew slightly towards like the Texas panthers, but they're still very like distinctly Florida panthers. They're their own little like distinct population unit or group there.
When you say they skew towards the Texas panthers, do you mean genetically or like phenotypically, like the way they look?
So that's more genetically. And so phenotypically, I'm not sure if there's like enough data to like compare between like direct physical measurements or characteristics. Like I think one of the on the ground like panther biologists of like FWC might know more. But what I mean by skew is that you basically have this like group of genetic variation that's very distinctly like a canonical Florida panther, and then another group that's your Texas panthers that are like on another side of that spectrum. And so you still have these. So like here's your pretend like I know some people are listening to this. So pretend like on your right hand you have your Florida panther group, and then on your left hand you have your Texas panthers or Texas pumas. And so your hybridized panthers are kind of skewed maybe like 2 or 3 inches to the right or to the left of where your Florida panthers would be. And so they're still kind of in that group that you would associate with those canonical Florida panthers. But again, in the past, there was historical gene flow between populations. And so it's likely that those panthers that existed that have now been extirpated from like the southeastern United States were somewhere in between as well. And so that's kind of what they've seen with those genetic analyses between the Florida panthers and the Texas pumas.
So I'm going to ask a crazy question. It sounds to me like what you're saying is that there is genetic distinction between Florida panthers and other panthers. Because like I've heard a lot of people bring this up, that there is no longer a distinction genetically between them, and therefore they're not Florida panthers, they're just mountain lions, they're just puma, right? So like why, like people have made this argument like, well, why are we trying to protect this endangered species when it's no longer even distinguishable from the other populations? Is that true, or is this just a rumor?
Lean probably more towards there not being a lot of like this scale of like genetic analyses until more recently, especially evaluating the success of the hybridization program. Like again, the study came out like at least within the last couple of years. And you're talking about a data set of like, I think it's like 4,000 panthers altogether of that. So it's a massive data set where they're looking at all of these genetic like markers across or variants across these two populations. And it's really the first time that they've ever really been able to see what there's strong evidence that suggests that there's still this distinct unit compared to these mainland pumas.
So yes, they are genetically distinguishable from panthers in Colorado.
Yes. Yeah. So if I design like a genetic like ID testing panel to like kind of like you would do in forensics, what you get from panthers would be very different than what you'd get from like the Colorado puma.
People are going to lose their mind over that, because so many people have been arguing that there's no genetic distinction anymore and we should stop trying to protect these panthers. But I guess that's good. I guess it's good news for the panthers that there is still genetic distinction.
I mean, it's hard too, because it goes back to the question of like, what is a species? Like, what is the population? Mm-hmm. And those lines can get really blurry. And a lot of that is just out of human, like we made decisions that this is this category, this goes in this box, and this goes in this box.
Well, and I feel like those lines keep getting blurrier and blurrier because
you have hybrids.
Our genetic abilities are getting better and better. And so now, like it used to be like, oh, there's, I think it was like 6 or 7 subspecies of white-tailed deer in continental United States. And now they're like, never mind, there's 32. And it's like, okay, well, like, how far are we going to go with this? Like, are we just going to keep renaming subspecies, or, but the
Like,
reality is you could take a key deer and take it out to Wisconsin, and it could breed with a Wisconsin deer. It would just be a 300-pound buck on a 50-pound doe. It might kill her, but technically they could breed. So are they the same species? You know.
I was
So
just
you
gonna
said
say, oh, was that? Go ahead, Cody.
so George, on the key deer, you said you have a chapter looking at key deer. Like what's going on real quick with them? Just out of curiosity, is like assisted migration the only solution? Are they
oh,
screwed?
the key deer are weird. Yeah, so my chapter is looking at how key deer are adapting to highly urbanized environments. And Matt had his hand up.
So, as a non-Floridian,
Hmm.
is a key deer? It's just like a subspecies that's on one specific island in like the Florida Keys. Are they on a bunch of islands?
It's a couple of islands.
Yeah, so there's at least like 40 islands or so that they've been found in and that they do occupy. So they'll swim from island to island. I think like key
Yeah.
deer have been like observed swimming up to something like 4
In
miles
salt water.
in salt water.
I just want you to wrap your mind
Helps
around
them float.
deer. These are deer that are swimming from island to island. Like, imagine a deer just swimming across the Caribbean from one island to another, but just a micro version of that.
Yeah, if you
That's
Google like key deer
Right.
swimming, you'll see pictures of like a group of key deer just with their heads bobbing out of the water, like swimming towards another island. It's great.
It's wild.
But yeah, with the key deer, basically looking at whole genomes. So I have the full genome sequenced for a group of about 20 individuals, and trying to see how those key deer differ in terms of potential genetic adaptations compared to mainland white-tailed deer. And so, like right now, with some early preliminary results, it looks like there's kind of a mix of things. So there's some things that like they're very specifically adapted to, and some of these are like more neurological type of, or genes involved in neurological type of functions, like behavior. And if you know anything about key deer, you know key deer are not shy at all compared to their mainland relatives. They'll come up to people at tables and like kind of like dogs, just like want to be pet or like beg for food. In addition to that, there's some evidence that there's some potentially balancing selection or some maintenance of variation in that population that's potentially helping keep diversity in the key deer despite like hurricanes and diseases and things like random like parasites or flies that come in and wipe out like huge chunks of the key deer population. So it's a pretty cool example of a species that continues to like survive in these highly urbanized environments. But at the same time, if you compare like modern key deer compared to like their historical relatives, they probably look pretty different.
Well, yeah, they're like 50 pounds,
Yeah.
but they still grow some big racks.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. And they look ridiculous because their racks are so big compared to their bodies. It's awesome. Um, this is totally, well, kind of on topic, but slightly off topic. I had no idea this was a thing, but there's a white-tailed deer species in Curacao. Did you know that? Like, I went to Curacao, which is like all the way at the very end of the Caribbean chain. And there's a white-tailed deer species on that island that's even smaller than the key deer. Yeah.
Yeah, I had no
Um,
idea. I know there's like another population in St. Vincent's Island that's like a kind of like another isolated like white-tailed deer species similar to key deer, but I had no idea they were.
Wait, St. Vincent Island in Florida?
Oh, not St. Vincent Island. Sorry, I'm thinking of up in British Columbia. There's an
Vancouver
island
Island?
there, not Vancouver Island. There's an island there. I need to look it up where there is like another population.
Interesting. Man, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said like it's really cool to see that the key deer keep on adapting in that situation, because I think just white-tailed deer in general are just such an adaptable species. When you think about all the different habitats where you find them, they're all the way down at the southern end of the Caribbean. They're all the way, up in the north, getting close to the Arctic. I mean, not quite that far, but getting in Canada, they get pretty far up there. So it's kind of wild. And
Yeah,
man,
there's something really cool about some of the genes that might be associated with some of those adaptations, but I can't say much about that until I publish. So, but I think that'd be of interest to
We might have to have you back on when you
Yeah.
probably do. But I think that's potentially a real good segue for us to get into this paper a little bit here, because while your research, being focused on those genetics, uh, drawing that link to sort of the ecology that affects us as hunters is is a little bit more of a stretch. This paper that we picked out to talk about uh, is I think a lot closer to to hunters, and I think it's going to really speak to the people that are interested in hunting deer in Florida, but maybe also in other areas. And the reason I guess I'll mention what the paper is, and why I think this is such a cool one. And just fun fact, I've been trying to get this paper onto the podcast since the very first episode. This was the first paper I picked out, and I'm stoked that we're finally doing it. So, so this paper, the title is Spatiotemporal Pattern of Interactions Between an Apex Predator and Sympatric Species. Those are some big words that basically mean that the authors are trying to look at how the Florida panther interacts with prey species like the deer, the turkey, raccoons, and a bunch of other species. I didn't write them all down, but a whole bunch of species, um, and how those interactions shape the way that these animals move throughout the day and through the night, and how they go about their day. This study was done by a Marta Prat-Guitart and some other people from the University of Florida. And I think I want to touch on the relevance of this paper because I think predator management is this huge topic in the whitetail woods, right? Especially when you think about people that have private lands. They have entire management plans to control coyotes, raccoons, foxes, bears, you name it. But here in Florida, we have so many predators compared to other parts of the country that trying to manage all of them would be impossible. I mean, we've got pythons, we've got alligators, we've got panthers, bears, like just so many different things. And we've actually talked about a couple of papers in the past where we've and Matt and Cody, please correct me if I get this wrong because it's been a little while, but uh, we found that because of predator presence, the deer tend to move more during the crepuscular periods, right? The early morning and late evening, because hunting pressure is one predator that's diurnal, and then there's nocturnal predators that sort of force them into those uh, early morning and evening times. But in this particular case, we're dealing with a super efficient nocturnal predator. And I think it's important to point out that the Big Cypress deer study, which I imagine, George, you're relatively familiar with, they tagged like a couple hundred deer, I think close to 300 deer, and then looked at sources of mortality over a course of 5 years and found that more than 70% of those deer were killed by panthers. And so this is an incredibly efficient predator. And when you combine that efficiency with a six-fold increase in panther population down in the Everglades, that has to have some impact on the way that deer move through that landscape. And so that's why I was like really interested in this paper. So let's get into the methods a little bit. If one of you guys wants to shut me
Yeah,
up.
I can do that. And I'll just kind of, I think a lot of what this paper is talking about and like what you just mentioned is very specific to Florida, right? You have this panther population that's increasing, but in a lot of areas around the country, really, you have predator species that were largely, we try to get rid of them all, whether it was wolf, mountain lions, coyotes, and you now have regulations that are allowing those species to come back. And at the same time, you have all sorts of habitat loss and habitat fragmentation. So you have an increase in number of predators. You have more, or I guess you have less land that these animals, whether they be the predators or the deer, are occupying. So you're really forcing more interaction. So even though we're talking about Florida today, this can be applicable to a lot of places around the country.
That's a really good point too, because a lot of those predators that are starting to make comebacks, like wolves, if I might be mistaken here, but they are, typically nocturnal predators as well. I know definitely all the cat species are.
Mm.
Coyotes. Not that we're like protecting coyotes, but I don't know. This whole thing just kind of makes me think about that aspect of like putting pressure on the deer population at different times of day could be beneficial to the hunters. But I don't want to say too much before we get into it. So tell us about what they did.
So getting into the methods, like Mark said, they were tracking a bunch of different species. So they had it was the focal species that they were looking at was the Florida panther, and they wanted to see how panther movements influenced other predators. So you got black bear and you got bobcat, but also their prey. So you had white-tailed deer, you had wild pigs, raccoon, and turkeys. And not just how do the panthers influence those animal movements, but also how do those animal movements influence panther behavior. So they did this in the Big Cypress National Preserve. It was a 90 square mile study area, primarily cypress swamp, which going back to what Mark was saying before, these are deer that are living in, usually deer live in swamps, but like these are swamps where there's like 2 feet of standing water. Is like, I've seen Mark with some pictures of deer and it's like, they're floating on the water after you harvest them.
This is just to put it in perspective. Big Cypress is 750,000 acres. It's 750,000 acres, and the vast majority of it is underwater for the deer season. So like, we're not talking about like, oh, these deer are in this little swampy, creek
mucky
bottom.
stuff.
No, they're in this swamp that is just swamp forever. When they find a dry spot to put their, to get their feet to dry off and bed down, like it's like a tiny little island in the middle of vast open water. So it's a pretty crazy habitat.
And so they were studying these animal movements between April and September. This is back in 2014. So at this point, there's no hunting season. So really just looking at how these animals are influencing each other without having that human predation. There are still people that might be hiking and whatnot in that swampy area, though I don't know how many, do a lot of people walk around this area even though it's so wet?
There's trails out there. They're not going to be as dense as like trails in Colorado, for instance, but there are trails, and it's called slogging, and people take a lot of pride in it. And they're like, yeah, I slogged through the Everglades.
Yeah.
You just hike like, balls deep, like miles and miles.
Yeah, I do think they like strategically placed their traps too, where there were like trails. That way they like captured those like animals kind of moving through them.
Yeah. So like George was saying, they had cameras that they're calling camera traps. It's not actually trapping the animal, but it's just taking a snapshot when these things walk by to get an observation. And they placed one camera every just under 2 miles. So they had, or 2 square miles. So you have 50 stations across this 90 square mile area. And they set those cameras up on trails or areas that they would expect to kind of keeping it close to the center of that 2 mile square, but in a spot where you'd expect to see more activity. And then they evaluated the habitat use or, the occupancy of these different animals based on the frequency of pictures or observations that occurred hourly. And, if you might have, like, if you have your own camera set up, sometimes you have a deer that's just sitting in that spot and you get a shit ton of just pictures because the deer is just sitting right in front of your camera. So they accounted for that. They were looking at distinct events. What's that?
It's when you put a pile of corn in front of your camera.
I don't know what you do, but anyways, so they got all this data, and then they looked at 4 different activity patterns. So we talked about this a little bit before, but diurnal, which they classified as 1 hour after sunrise and 1 hour before sunset. Nocturnal, which was basically just night. Crepuscular, so that's 1 hour before sunrise rather than after sunrise, and 1 hour after sunset. And then a new term for me is cathermal, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. But that's just like an irregular, they're showing up kind of sporadically. There's not really any timing associated with when their observations were detected. So they take that, they figure out, okay, what's the activity or the behavior of this animal, of the species. And then they also looked at spatial overlap, or what they called activity pattern overlap, which was a metric that they used basically to quantify the amount of overlapping area use. And the last thing that they did was a time to event approach. Basically, you can think of there being any event, in this case, an event being a picture of a specific species, and then the time to the next species being observed at that location. So looking to see how these species are interacting with each other. And, like one of their hypotheses, one of the things that they're expecting was that if you have a prey species, say it's your white-tailed deer, that's observed at this camera, the time between the last picture of that species or that deer and the first picture of a puma or panther, they're expecting that to be relatively quick because the panthers are well adapted to figure out where these deer are. So they're looking at the time to event from the prey to the panthers, but also the panthers to the prey, and then the panthers to competitors like the bobcat and the bear. I think that's all I got for methods. Oh, and they also, I will say one other thing. So they did incorporate some habitat stuff with that, which I thought was pretty cool. Like we were saying before, a lot of this area is underwater. There are some higher spaces, and panthers, I learned from reading this, they like to avoid the wet, so they'll try to find that higher elevation or the drier areas. So they put that into their model, and they also looked at the habitat type. So really, a cool model for looking at how these animals are interacting with each other.
Yeah, I like this paper a lot. It's pretty sweet.
So what did they find?
Yeah, go for it, Cody.
All right, so
Or George.
Results real quick. To start, it was April to September, right, in 2014. Yeah. So in just those few months, they had about 300 panther photos, about 400 bobcat, 650 black bear, 1,300 whitetail, about 400 raccoons, only 25 boar, which I've heard about the wild hog population.
We can touch on that here in a second.
Cypress, so make me note of that. Remember to talk about that later. And then about 1,000 photos of wild turkey. I think maybe the main, if we can you bring up, Matt, figure 3?
I can.
Kind of the main takeaway, I'd say.
So, is that big enough for you guys? I can try to zoom in.
Yeah, you're good.
All right.
Yeah, so we nothing really is all that wild between. Well, I'll just start. The panther and the bobcat, they don't seem to really be avoiding each other. Bobcats they aren't avoiding panthers. They're both nocturnal, generally speaking. The bears, they're much more crepuscular, and they did find some evidence that the bears are avoiding panthers. The surprising one here is the white-tailed deer have movement patterns totally opposite those. They're diurnal, and you can see the panther. You can't see my screen or my mouse, but the dotted line there is when the activity pattern of the panther is highest, and that's early morning and late into the evening. So they're nocturnal, where the deer are moving most during the day. Most of those photos are coming in the middle of the day, or throughout the day. So that's pretty surprising. The raccoons, like Matt mentioned, this new term, cathemeral, they kind of just mill around as they feel like it.
I think the correct terminology is they don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
They're just chaos incarnate.
Yeah, they kind of just do what they want. The turkeys, they're diurnal, going out during the day, um, but didn't show in this time to encounter metric any real avoidance of panthers. Because from other studies, I think they mentioned in their own research, the turkey aren't big prey to the panthers.
It's because they're too damn fast and their eyesight's too damn good.
Well, I wonder, how much of this is also because they're sleep up in a tree during the night,
Yeah,
and like,
Yeah.
I mean,
I
I'm
would call
assuming
that
the
pretty good.
panthers will climb a tree, but by the time a turkey, by the time the panther gets to the turkey, might hear something and fly off.
I don't know if it's worth it for a panther to climb the tree though. Like these
For a
trees,
turkey, yeah,
I think you have to keep in mind when you came down here to Florida. Remember how tall some of these pine trees are?
yeah,
The turkeys will pick out the tallest one. They'll roost like 60 feet up in the air out here. It's crazy.
It's just
yeah.
like a vertical like stump
Yeah.
too.
Like man, that would suck to have to climb that thing. I just don't think it's worth it for a
For some
panther.
chicken wings.
But but I would argue though that like roosting in a tree is an excellent predator avoidance strategy.
Oh
So
yeah.
like I don't know. I don't really agree with their conclusion that like there wasn't like a pattern of like avoiding panthers. I'm like, yeah, they're sleeping in trees. I think they're doing a pretty damn good job at avoiding panthers.
But I wonder how much of that's like, it's the turkey behavior that's natural without panther. So it's not a response to panther behavior, right? Like
But
if
why?
you were to
But
remove the
why? Yeah.
panthers, you wouldn't have a change in turkey behavior.
Well, and I think that's also because a turkey has terrible sense of smell. So they don't have that like night vision that a deer does because a deer is literally their nose is their eyes at
Mm-hmm.
nighttime, right? So I think a turkey sleeping in a tree is predator avoidance, but it's all nocturnal predators. It's
Mm-hmm.
bobcats, it's coyotes, it's everything.
Right.
So I feel like panthers falls in that too. But I get what you're saying. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
specifically responding to panther presence or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um,
Should I keep?
but
I
oh
think
yeah,
we hit pretty much everything, but hogs, they're out during the day, kind of similar patterns to the whitetail in this area.
So I got a quick question for you guys. So are hogs usually this quiet during the night? Like
no,
did
they actually are very nocturnal. They move around at night a lot, especially because they got incredible noses. So they have that sort of defense mechanism.
Yeah, yeah, and
But
I'd say like up in North Florida, like anecdotally too, like it does seem like they tend to be more like observable at night. Like I do see them more when
yeah,
it's dark. But again, this up in northern Florida, like or in central Florida, you don't have panthers like you do down in South Florida.
yeah. But to your point, Cody, what you said about the hogs, you know, uh, down in South Florida or just in general, the areas where panther densities are really high, we really saw hogs kind of disappear. And I don't know, like I haven't seen any data on this, but presumably it's because a hog is just it's an easier target for a panther to eat. And then on top of that, the piglets are very small, and they're easy prey for a python. So when you combine the python explosion and the panther, reintroduction, or not reintroduction, but resurgence, um, we just kind of saw hogs disappear. And if you talk to some old timers from down south, I'm like, I wasn't hunting back in these days, but um, apparently there once was a time where you'd go into places like Big Cypress and Holy Land, Rotenberger, like all these Everglades WMAs, and there was just hogs everywhere, like all over the place. And now you'd be lucky if you even see a hog track. But interestingly, some areas we are starting to see hogs making a comeback, and I feel like as an ecologist, I think about um, like invasion ecology, like when there's an introduction of a species, it typically kind of overshoots its carrying capacity, and then it kind of comes back down, and its prey goes back up, and they kind of oscillate for a while until they kind of find that balance. And I kind of wonder if we're starting to see that maybe a little bit with the panthers. That initially they sort of had this explosion. They were really able to hammer some of those prey species. Um, but I kind of wonder if we're going to start seeing those things balance out again. Um,
Yeah, I have heard like some like anecdotes that like you do get the pudgiest panthers where there are the boar. It just seems like
Yeah.
uh, they're optimizing their foraging strategy to get the most caloric.
well, I mean, hogs are so easy to sneak up on compared to a deer because they're in groups, they're eating, they're super loud. So like you can make all the noise you want sneaking up on them as long as you're downwind. Like,
Yeah, like the time I think in this paper, like I think it was like table one where like they looked at how long like an individual stuck around the camera traps basically, and most stuff was like okay, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, and then you have the boars which were there for like almost 4 hours just hanging out, which is like
did they bait these camera traps? No, right?
I don't think so. I think they just like cleared some like brush and stuff and kept them relatively like clean. Yeah, but they're just hanging out.
Yeah, hogs definitely they're an easy target. So, um, but I think let's talk about some of these patterns though, because I think there's some really interesting stuff here. Like I was saying, that applies to like other places too, not just Florida, because most predator species are nocturnal, right? You think about coyotes, bobcats, bears, things that other states have as well. And Matt, like you were saying, in a lot of states, we kind of eradicated those predators, and now that those are starting to make a comeback, um, I kind of wonder if we're going to start seeing similar patterns um, in other states where deer become more daytime movers because the predators are so active at night. And with that thought in mind, would it be a good idea for management of a property to maybe find some sort of balance of having predators on your landscape and not just trying to wipe them all out so that you get more daytime movement from your deer?
I think if you're going after like mature bucks, something like that, I think it's something that you might have um, some benefits to it. But then at the same time, if you're hunting private property and can really limit hunting pressure, I imagine you're still going to see deer moving around during the day, like big deer moving around during the day. You might, still want to get out earlier in the morning compared to if you have some predators. Um, so yeah,
But
I could see that. I could see like enticing the trophy animals that have the more wisdom, right? They've been around more hunting seasons. They are more familiar with people, and they're the ones that you hear people talk about go underground during the hunting season.
yeah,
I could see pushing those larger deer, or whether it's deer, elk, whatever, to be more active. But I think from if you're looking to just harvest animals, I wonder if it's kind of like a quantity versus quality thing, like we talked about with
yeah.
pronghorn talk last time. It's like what is it that you're managing for? What is it that you're looking for?
Well, and to that point, I think if you like allow more predators, right, those are also going to have a negative impact on that population.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, they might create more opportunity for humans to harvest those deer, which is going to have even more of a negative impact on that population and probably cause a decrease in age class.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I can understand why people want to remove the predators because they want to give the deer, like honestly, a safe haven at nighttime that they can get old and become these giant bucks. But at the same time, not having predators allows them to get into a pattern where you're like barely ever going to get a chance at them. So there's kind of like a balance to be found there. Like I think maybe like a little bit of predator pressure could help, get them moving more during the day. But too much is going to have, is going to prevent you from growing big bucks.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and they mentioned that in like a little bit about that in the discussion where they're like they reference like a paper, and there's like several, like there's a decent amount of literature on this where like you have deer that kind of adjust their strategies to be a little bit more nocturnal if there's a lot of high hunting pressure. But when there's a predator in an area, then that might shift. Then all of a sudden they have those nocturnal predators that are kind of pushing them back to these more diurnal patterns where they're more active during the day. But yeah, I think as far as like a management strategy, it's really interesting to like try to benefit from or trying to find ways to really benefit from the predator presence in ways that can help boost your ability to go and hunt deer.
Yeah, and like I'm thinking even further about what I was just saying about like having predators allows hunters to be more successful because their deer are out during the day. And I wonder if that's like a big player in why we struggle to grow bigger bucks in South Florida, because they're just that much more accessible and we're harvesting the nice bucks.
Cool.
I wonder though, like if they repeated this study during hunting season, like most of your natural predators, non-human predators, are going to go after the weak, and like we have learned that panthers are very efficient predators, but I would imagine they're still going after the weaker, easier prey, whereas human predators are going after, or a lot of them, not myself because I'm not good enough, are going after like the top dog.
Yeah.
We talk about deer hunting. So if they repeated this during hunting season, I wonder if some of these patterns would shift for the deer and they'd pick to go up against a panther rather than being exposed to a human.
I'm sure they would, because let's be real here, like a panther might be pretty damn efficient, but they're not shooting them from 200 yards away with a rifle, Like, I mean, can you imagine if we were allowed to hunt with thermals at nighttime, like how efficient we would be? So
why not give panthers guns?
Yeah.
Then you'll see deer during the day.
But I also think if you did this study during season, like in the beginning of the season, it might still look just like this. But by the end of the season, I think you would start seeing that push towards crepuscular movement, because they're trying to avoid both the hunters during the day and the panthers at night, and the heat during the day. But just a fun fact, my experience in hunting in South Florida, especially in areas where there are a lot of panthers, has been that it's not just in the time of day that they're moving that they're avoiding panthers, but also the habitats that they use. Like I find that the deer down there use the ecosystem, like the habitat, in completely different ways than deer in areas where there are no panthers. Like one of the things that I see really frequently is deer just literally hanging out in ponds. Like they're bedded down in like flag ponds, sitting as far away from the edge as you possibly can. I've seen deer walking through ponds where literally like just their heads sticking out of the water and they're just walking through it like it's nothing. And you think about like, well, why would they be doing that? Like there's alligators in there, Well, an alligator is probably a lot less to contend with than a panther. And if you're in the water, I mean, if you've ever been on a boat on a calm day, the way that sound like reflects off of the water, like you can hear stuff from so far away, and you could definitely hear a panther trying to sneak up on you in the water. Whereas if you're bedded in an oak hammock, something could sneak up on you a lot easier. So I think it's really interesting, that these deer have truly like adapted to this like landscape of fear for these panthers in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, I'm curious too about what that means in terms of like locating potential threats, because a lot of the times they're focused on like olfactory or these like scents that they can pick up, since that's like their primary way of really navigating the world. And so like I imagine a panther has a more obvious scent than maybe an alligator in the water, but I'm not sure if that's actually true. I'm not sure how like alligator scents compared to like panther scents and their ability to detect these predators.
I mean, alligators stink, but they stink like algae. So
yeah,
so it's like, it's weird. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, we're coming up to the end of the podcast here, so this is where we like to think about, you know, based on this information, how would you guys change your strategy? Um, I guess especially if you were hunting in an area where there's lots of panthers.
I think you can extend it to an area where there's lots of predators, right? Because you can extend that
Yeah.
to hunters, right? I think that's how most hunters are gonna interact with us, right? It's like, and like for me, I'm thinking of, in some regards, one, try to hunt during the rut because deer are going to do whatever they want to do during the rut. But then you also have, like during the season, it's tough because, you still have these animals that are moving around most during like the start of the early in the morning and then later in the evening. But then you also have when people are, leaving the woods in the middle of the day, you can still see a lot of stuff. And so I feel like with hunter, like with people, our behaviors are, what was that, cathermal, where we just are active at all times, and the deer are just gonna
I
kind of
don't know.
respond to that.
I don't know that that's true though. I think the average hunter is only active for like a couple hours in the morning and a couple hours in the evening.
Unless they leave in the middle of the day and
They
go take a
don't.
nap or something.
Not in
But
Florida anyway. Like in Florida, the amount of people that are out of their tree stand by 9:30 in the morning is like ridiculous.
yeah,
It does get hot very quickly.
It starts getting hot, and people
yeah.
just get miserable and they get out of the tree. But I have made this, like I've said this so many times, Cody. I've told you this numerous times. In Florida, especially South Florida, you just got to stay in your damn tree, especially early season before like they've figured out that they're being hunted. The number of deer that I've shot, like at 11 or 12 o'clock, like middle of the day when it's cooking hot, it's 100 degrees out, everybody's already left the woods, and deer are still moving. So, and I think this paper proves it, like there really is value in being out there in the middle of the day in South Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's going into it. I was like, definitely saying I just got to sit the whole day. But now thinking about it a little longer, not as confident, but I think that's still my best plan of attack. Can I ask one last question?
Yeah.
Something that popped up to me. You remember one of the earlier papers on the bears, and we learned like they kleptoparasitize
I
pumas.
was thinking about that too.
And here they're showing that the bears actively avoided the panthers. And
Yeah.
you would think they'd be like following them around from what we learned in that paper. That was kind of interesting to me. But so you thought about that too, Mark?
Yeah, like because yeah, exactly. Same thought process. Like they avoid them, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the reason for that is, but in California, I think that's where that paper came from, right? Yeah, like I forget what the percentage was, but it was more than half of the deer that mountain lions killed were kleptoparasitized by bears, and because of that, the high density of bears in that area were causing deer to kill 6 times more deer than they otherwise would. Just like kind of crazy. But we don't see that here in Florida, and I have no idea why.
Or at least in this study in Big Sky. But I wonder what they'd be doing at that time of year.
Well, I also wonder if maybe it does happen, but the densities of these populations are lower. And maybe it's also because, in California, where those mule deer were, it's kind of like desert-ish. I think I'm not 100% sure on that actually, but
it is weird, because
maybe the density, like the biomass in that area is so much lower that like there's not enough forage for the bears, so they start kleptoparasitizing. Maybe in Florida, like there's so much greenery and berries and stuff everywhere. Maybe bears just don't feel the need to do that. I don't know. Just no clue. But to your point, real quick, Cody, you were talking about sitting all day. An alternative to that is something I did last year. Is like I kept getting pictures of a buck, sort of in the middle of the day, And so I went out at like 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock or something, and I sat until like 4 o'clock. So I just literally sat through the middle of the day, and I got a shot at that buck. I just didn't take it.
Wait, so I can sleep in, make a big pancake breakfast, and then go hunting?
You could, like, I mean, especially, it's like one of those things. It's like you're not going to kill them if you're not out there. So if on a certain day, like you don't have the ability to be out there in the morning,
Yeah.
there's still value in getting out there like in the middle of the day. Although, the chances of seeing activity are always going to be higher, you know, in the early morning or the evening. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, you still do get those three distinct like bumps, like with that figure three where you had that like the bump in the morning and the bump in the evening, but then you still have like a little bump like right at midday, like exactly.
well, and keep in mind, like, this is oftentimes like during the rut. Those are the times when, like, I'm like, you just got to be in the woods as long as you can, like as long as you can bear it, because those deer are just running amok the whole time. Like, there's no predicting when they're gonna show up. Chances are higher during the morning and the evening because that's probably when does are getting on their feet and walking around, and the bucks are following them around. But those bucks are still cruising around looking for new does all day long. So, again, you just got to get out there. You got to be out in the woods, otherwise you're never going to kill them. So, any last words? Any sage advice anybody wants to give?
Nice to finally get to the paper.
I know, right? I'm
Yeah,
excited.
it's a cool paper.
Yeah, it was really cool paper. I was nerding out about like some of their circular statistics because they did like analysis where like time is a circle, so you have to kind of like account for that circular pattern of time and do like a statistical analysis that way, which is pretty cool.
I actually had to do that for my dissertation with wind because I was looking
Wind.
at wind direction, and how like the wind direction um, in like compared to the beach, like the angle of the wind towards the beach would affect like which assemblages of fish were found like in the near shore. But of course, like 0 and 360 are like the same thing.
Mhm.
So I had to figure out a way to make a circular variable, which was not easy.
Yeah, that's cool. That also makes me think about like how the thermals might differ in these like flat, swampy, like areas like Big Cypress compared to other places. But yeah,
I mean,
I don't think we know it.
I think there's a million things that we could think about.
Yeah.
It's just like opened up Pandora's box. But I can tell you one thing, come opening weekend, I'm going to be trying to be out in the middle of the day if the sun allows me to. If we get a little bit of rain or overcast, I'm going to be out there in the middle of the day. So, and on that note, if you haven't subscribed yet or followed or whatever the button says on the app that you're using, make sure you do it now. And yeah, we'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks, George, for joining
Yeah, thanks,
us.
George. Thanks for
Awesome.
listening.
Yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, this
Yeah.
was fun.
Great meeting you.
This was great, honestly, to be able to finally talk about your research. I feel like we always like just touch it, but we finally got to dig into it a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I still have to like restrain myself a little bit because until some of this stuff gets published, but it is fun to
We
start
probably
thinking
should
of
have put
things.
a disclaimer at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's all preliminary and based on your opinions, not published research.
That's fair.
Well, now we got it at the end. So, all right, peace out, guys.
Bye.
See ya.